Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House alongside Mr. Fun himself, Martin Popoff.
I don't know if I'm Mr. Fun, but anyways, I'm Mr. Friday at the Funhouse at least. So
Mr. Friday. I like that even better. Mr. Friday is a
yeah,
good
I don't equate with fun very well. So anyways,
Yeah, I don't know how
so
much fun it is
yeah,
either, but
um, yeah, ready to go here. With this was a really hard assignment, but of course summer is here, so it's fun to do anyways, and it's hot
yeah,
all over the world, but it's definitely hot here in Toronto, and that's my hot music to talk about too. So
that's right. That's right. As the weather heats up a little bit, although it's been cooler the last couple of days here in New York than it was last week, but I think that's going to change over the next couple of days. But I'll take 70, 75 any day, Martin.
nice.
Breezy,
Sure.
sunny, I don't think there's a cloud in the sky today. It looks like a gorgeous day out there today. And what better time to talk about 90s big four of thrash than in the summer months, although it's not quite
Absolutely.
officially summer yet. But yeah, we're kind of catching up on this. We did the 80s of Anthrax, Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, geez, like a month ago or so. Maybe a little bit more longer than that, I forget. And we're returning back to go the next decade. And as Martin and I were talking before we started taping, we really had to go re-listen to a lot of these albums again because
Yeah.
uh, to me, this decade for these bands in some aspects was kind of like a wasteland. And I was listening to a lot of other things around, the middle of the decade. And I had heard or had most of these at some point in time, but hadn't revisited any of them in quite a while. So, it's always bad when you like look at a track listing and you're like, yeah, none of that rings a bell, right?
Absolutely. This
Then
was
you're in
super hard
trouble.
for me too. Yeah. This was really weird because I had to go play most of these songs all over again. And for me, it wasn't that I wasn't into them or I was off doing something else. I mean, this actually lines up really nicely with um, when we were super serious into Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles and interviewing these bands for all these
Yeah.
albums. I interviewed, yeah, most of these bands for most of these albums in one form or another, or had to review them, or we debated them, quite deeply. I remember some of these bands coming through on in-person press tours. Megadeth playing a little club show for the press, all this kind of stuff, right? But yeah, I had to go through it again, and I'd say most of my suspicions were confirmed. I had some really pleasant kind of movements here as well. And I was just thinking this morning, comparing this to my 80s list, I realized that my appreciation actually, this is kind of different, and it's an interesting theme between your experience with the 80s one and mine with the 80s one, because it's quite a contrast. I think for me here, um, well, probably for you as well, but the appreciation for Metallica goes way down, but for me, the appreciation for Megadeth goes way up. For Anthrax, it goes way up, and for Slayer, it even goes up. So I actually like a lot of this more, and it's funny. We've got I think you got 15. Is that what you're looking at?
I have
15
16, but it all depends on if you're including
16.
that Slayer punk covers album.
Okay, well, I was including that too, and I still only have 15. Oh, we'll find out what I'm missing then. So maybe I'm missing one somehow here along the way. But anyways, I found that the entire top half of my list I like a lot, and the entire bottom half of my list I don't like very much. So all right, so let's get into it. The first one I don't have a physical of. At the bottom of the list, I'll just name the numbers the way I see them here, and we'll find out what I've got wrong. But number 15, Risk. Megadeth, August 13th, 1999. I guess we'll do three at a time, right?
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how it pans up. So we've got Dan Huff producing on this one. So what I don't like about this album, so this is the last one for Marty Friedman. And we know Marty Friedman was the guy, weirdly kind of pushing a pop direction with the band. And this is the last one before he goes off and becomes super famous in Japan and does all sorts of shred albums and stuff. It's the first one for drummer Jimmy DeGrasso as well. But yeah, I find there's Dave trying to be melodic, Dave trying to be socially conscious, Dave trying to sing. There's a lot of sort of spare arrangements, a little bit of electronic stuff put in here. There's some acoustic stuff, some funky riffing. Yeah, this is just notoriously well, I guess it is notoriously in the entire catalog, the mellowest and poppiest Megadeth album. And it just doesn't line up for me. I find Dan Huff's production to be also kind of like too billowy, pillowy, soft on Megadeth here, and it doesn't
Really odd choice for a producer, right? I mean,
yeah.
nothing wrong with him, but it's like, yeah, you wouldn't think.
Yeah, part of this whole Nashville craze thing that
Yeah.
that all these metal guys, these concentric circles around Nashville that people have, right? Adrian Belew, Robert Fripp, Brad Whitford, Accept. There's all this moving to Nashville, recording in Nashville, Deep Purple recording in Nashville, all that kind of thing, right? Although this time they recorded in Toronto, which is kind of interesting. But okay, so the last one is that. Next, I've got Cryptic Writings, Megadeth, which predictably is exactly situated psychically speaking between euthanasia and Risk. Dan Huff again, Nashville again, went gold June 17th, 1997. So weird time for metal. A low point for metal. I remember that at the magazine, like half our debates, we always had questions to all these metal guys, us complaining to the metal guys and them complaining back to us lowly scribes about how metal was just so not in vogue and all this kind of thing. This is the last one for Nick Menza. Trust, I kind of like a pretty good, straightforward song. My favorites on here would be Mastermind, The Disintegrators, Sin, and She-Wolf. So kind of getting later into the track listing, but there's some weird treated vocals. There's harmonica on Have Cool Will Travel. Use the Man as acoustic, dark Western sort of music, but kind of cool. So yeah, again here it's we're just starting to complain about the band. We're starting to see them try these poppy things, and it's funny all the different ways these bands, including Metallica themselves, react to the Black Album. They all kind of do it differently, right? In the 90s, I guess the theme is they're reacting to the success of the Black Album, but they're also reacting to the success of grunge and to the unfashionability of metal at the same time. And they all kind of go different ways with it. Next, I've got Reload, Metallica. And, here, I love the Bob Rock production on these albums. I think that's one of the cool things about Metallica is they're always trying to look for interesting production ideas. It's 76 minutes long. November 18th, 97, went 3 times platinum. I love Fuel, but I'm finding so much of this album like slow, doomy, bluesy. Lars he's kind of got this one track mind where the drums are always recorded fantastically big, even though half the time, everybody else is playing quietly. It's kind of a weird thing with this band at this point, but Better Than You is pretty cool. Kind of a Metallica at this point, when they're doing something cool, my notes always say butt shaking vibe, right? So I like when they get into that mid tempo zone and even Lars told us at Brave Words, he was really into AC/DC around this time, right? And that's when they kind of get into that. But yeah, a lot of the rest of it, I'm not crazy about. My notes say things like slow, Sabbathy, dull, tribal, but innovative. So sometimes it's kind of like stodgy and sort of like Lars is hitting some toms. A lot of doomy things. They get into that sort of weird kind of shuffle zone that they get into sometimes. So yeah, I'm just not liking the direction at this point, and not particularly because it's mellow, but just because I'm bored by it, and that's kind of a theme with Metallica through these. That's why I have. Okay, so I numbered my stuff wrong. I got 2 number 14s here, so I must have 16. So my first 3, anyways, and I'll fix my numbering, are Risk, Cryptic Writings, and Reload. There you go.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Yeah, I was just going to double check, make sure I didn't screw something up. So.
15.
All right. My number 16 is going to be Anthrax's Volume 8, The Threat Is Real.
Right.
Third album with John Bush. Yeah, kind of to me, more of the same of what we got on Stomp 442. It's kind of this groovy metal, alternative metal, not very memorable, terrible album cover. It's definitely not thrash. I don't find a lot of interesting riffs. They got a lead guitar issue at this time, right? Also, you got some guest people and stuff. And yeah, it's I mean, Inside Out is a terrible song. P&V is a terrible song. Toast to the Extras is kind of like country. I don't really find anything all that interesting here. And I love John Bush, as we'll talk about a little bit later. But I just don't find that the middle albums in his era of the band all that interesting at all. And I think the band is really floundering just to find a direction of what they want to do. And you talked about it before about how you got metal isn't in vogue and you got alternative and grunge and all this kind of stuff. And all these bands are just kind of like trying to figure out what the hell to do. Then you got new metal later in the decade. It's just really, really messy to me. So yeah, that's my number 16. Number 15, I'm going to go with Reload. Sequel to Load, last with Jason Newsted. To me, I remember at the time, I was a huge Metallica fan, and these Load albums just really just massively disappointed me, and just the direction of these albums. I find most of it fairly uninteresting. It's plodding, like you said, it's bluesy, it's doomy. Fuel is a good song. That's pretty good. The Memory Remains has a pretty good riff. Man, James's whiny vocals on these albums just is a complete turnoff to me. I always thought he had one of the cool vocal styles of any, thrash singer, or, the different styles of metal that were coming up in the 80s. And then he started singing like this, and I'm just kind of like, what is this nonsense? So I just find most of this album pretty unlistenable. So that's my number 15. My number 14 is Risk. And again, just kind of like Anthrax and Metallica. I mean, they're moving away from thrash into this kind of like groove laden, hard rocky sound. Loads of atmosphere on this album. Sadly, though, there's no interesting songs on here, hardly at all. Dave's singing in a different vocal style. There's just loads of these like atmospheric, kind of like hard rock, groovy tracks, whatever. There's nothing thrash on this at all. There's lots of these pop melodies, but yet they're not memorable. It's just a mess of an album. I mean, this is easily, to me, Megadeth's worst album of all time, and it's my number 14. So yeah.
Nice. All right. Okay, my number 13, I'm going with Undisputed Attitude, Slayer. So yeah, an interesting thing about this one. I mean, this is actually quite a fun album, and it's a good education for me because this is not the kind of punk that I know and love well. I'm like into the original punk from 77 and 78, 79. This is more they're going for the fast hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's covers of all that. It's heavy, it's comedic, it's fast. There's a lot of perfectly locked down superhuman D beats. D beat being the Motorhead does that too, right? It's a certain well-known hardcore snare drum, bass drum sort of pattern. So there's lots of that on here. The production's good. Yeah. I'm looking at the track listing, and I did not grow up with any of these songs. I just was not into hardcore punk at all. But it's kind of cool that they did this, and it's very it's quite obscure hardcore punk songs too. It's not even the popular stuff that I would know actually really well. And then you've got the one extra original of theirs at the end, Gemini, with kind of like fairly clean singing on it, right? But and yeah, some of the songs on here do have a little bit of the straight old school punk attitude, because the hardcore bands would slow down. So there are some sort of up tempo, mid pace sort of things on it as well. So yeah, just kind of a weird thing, and I don't really have the history with it. Okay, so my number 12 is Load, June 4th, 96, 5 times platinum. Again, love the production. I just think they get just such a heavy, cool guitar sound and bass drum sound. I think Ain't My Bitch is a really cool song on here. King Nothing is good too. It's kind of a cool, groovy one that really sounds like a Black Album song. So I think that's good. Later in the track list, I really like Wasting My Hate as well. Up tempo, accessible, a little AC/DC into that one. But you got Ronnie with that sort of Southern rock, slow sound. Outlaw Torn, just dull, doomy, bluesy. These adjectives I've been using a lot, where they're just, and I noticed a little bit with some of the things they do here, like all the different it was sort of coming out in the themes. Like you notice, oh, here's our here's our Alice in Chains, Jar of Flies, Sap sort of sound. But I've noticed a couple of times across these albums, bands seem to be a little enamored with what Danzig was doing at the time. So there's sometimes a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we all know Metallica also adopted a little bit of a goth look at this time, with a little bit of makeup and the short hair and stuff like that, the black clothes and all that. So yeah, again, yeah, Until It Sleeps actually on here totally reminds me of Danzig 4P. That sort of feel on this album. But yeah, 2x4 has got that shuffle thing that they do, so butt shaking, but in a bad way on here. So just not into that sort of feel on here. Okay, so my next one is Slayer, Diabolus in Musica. Oh yeah, I should have grabbed it. My thing is framed up and signed. I have one of those of this. But anyways, June 9th, 98, Rick Rubin producing. By 2009, this got to 306,000 copies, so it didn't go gold, but it did okay. This is the one, famously, there were complaints. I remember all of this at the time with the magazine. This is the one that, are there new metal things in
Yeah,
here?
this is the new metal album.
Yeah. But it's really, it traces here and there, and you just notice little things. And actually, as I was going through it, I was thinking, it's more new metal like Cold Chamber spooky core than it is new metal like thoroughly rap metal.
Yeah.
But you do hear him adapting a little bit of a rap metal cadence here and there, and you get the annoying the bullhorn vocal thing going on sometimes too. And I don't think the production's very good on this album. My favorites here though are Overt Enemy, which is very strange and proggy, kind of a different beat. Slayer actually does a lot of pretty cool, interesting things during the 90s. So yeah, that was one of the pleasant parts of going through this exercise is my renewed appreciation for 90s Slayer. Point is really good. That's kind of D beat, but it's got a lot of cool parts. Typical Tom on that one as well. Yeah, I found quite a bit to like on this one, and realized that the whole thing about the new metal thing is possibly a little sort of overstated. But yeah, from time to time you get a little bit of the Jonathan Davis kind of whispery vocal thing, like the I'm in psychic trauma sort of thing, right? So you can tell they're trying to be a little bit that way. And then with Rick Rubin sticking his nose in there again, possibly all of this conspires to, we got to do something to save this band and make them more relevant kind of thing. So there you go. That's my 13, 12, and 11.
Yeah, I think it was just an excuse for Slayer to be a little bit more experimental, and you got new metal is gaining in popularity, and they figured, oh, well, we can kind of do some of that stuff too, right? I remember at the time you had some new metal kids who were like, oh, there's the Slayer band, they're pretty cool too. I'm like, yeah, they've been around for almost 20 years, fella. It's like,
yeah.
All right. Speaking of Slayer, my number 13 is Undisputed Attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple of originals, lots of punk and hardcore covers. This is not really my thing. As everybody knows, I'm not much of a hardcore and punk guy. But I think they did it in fun. I guess you can kind of take it that way. It's funny, in re-listening to this recently, I was thinking, what instantly came to mind was like Stormtroopers of Death. But I think that's much more successful, even though that's mostly originals. That's a little bit more successful than this. But what was interesting here is that the originals on this, I didn't really like at all. I think the covers are well done for what they are. Again, I didn't grow up with them, so these are all mostly new to me. But I thought Disintegration, Free Money, really crushing way to start the album off. But for the most part, this like I said, it's not really my thing. It doesn't hold my interest all that much. But that's my number 13. Number 12, I'm going to go with Stomp 442 from Anthrax, second album with John Bush. Again, it just seems to me like Anthrax is really trying to find an identity here. Interesting cover though, right? But I think there's some history there that was supposed to be used with another band. And
it's Storm Thorgerson after after There Is No More Hypnosis, right?
Yeah. I do like In a Zone quite a bit. I think that is probably my favorite song on the album, and it reminds me more of the material they were doing on the first album. But I think here you got a band kind of in transition and trying to figure out where they fit in the kind of heavy music landscape at this point in time, which is, really all over the place. Got alternative rock, alternative metal, grunges on the outs, right? So it's, a weird album for them. I don't find it all that much interesting. And number 11, I'm going to go with Load. which I remember Martin at the time was pretty shocking. I remember like buying Load and being all excited about it, thinking, "What the hell is this?" You listen to it today, maybe not as drastic as we thought back in the day. King Nothing, that's actually a really good song. Cure is pretty good too. I don't mind 2x4. That's again, it's just kind of like this bluesy, grinding, sort of heavy type of thing that they were doing. But I think the problem with this album is that there's a lot of songs. I find most of it just kind of boring and unmemorable and uninteresting. And it lacks the kind of like intensity of the Metallica stuff that came before it. I get people, or people I think look back on this album and Reload and they think, well, it was just, they were doing something a little bit different. They need to evolve. And I get it. But I just don't find a lot of the songs all that good. And that's what it comes down to, right? But yeah, the production's it's a big sounding album. Guitars are very well recorded, I think, but just not a lot to love there. And that's my next three.
All right. I think we have a divergent theme growing here. I'm
Yeah, I
much
can
more
see
fond of
the
Anthrax as we move on.
Anthrax is kind of splitting us down the middle here, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of Anthrax, my number 10 is Persistence of Time, and it's funny. I think my dislike of this album was always clouded by the fact that I had it on vinyl and it's kind of long for vinyl and it always sounded a little thin to me, right? It's really glossy too. I took it out of the plastic, and this is a Canadian copy. I mean, they put a heck of a lot of gloss on that for a Canadian record, right? That's
Yeah.
it's weird. Anyways, August 21st, 1990 went gold, produced by Mark Dodson. And yeah, it's an ambitious album. I find it very dry and atonal and serious and fairly dark. Always hated that album cover. It's just too low rent thrash. Even that logo, I don't know. That logo, I just don't think it's a great logo. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Later on, H8 Red, One Man Stands. I kind of like the old school chugging mid-paced Anthrax that you got on here, but I just find this band to be a really creative band, and they're always trying to do interesting things. Charlie, as a songwriter and as a drummer in the band, he's always he's taking kind of the hardcore idea / thrash idea to new places all the time. He loves snare drum. He plays super fast. But yeah, Blood's kind of cool, strident opening, and then kind of turns into this punky sort of thing. Yeah, this is a good sort of return to maybe a new level of creativity and ambition. And I'm actually finding, I found it pretty interesting that even though Anthrax rated high for me in the 80s, it's even going higher for me in the 90s here. So number 9, I'm going with Metalica, otherwise known as the Black Album. And every time I go to type that in a book, I pause and go, am I supposed to put that in caps or not in caps? Right, the Black Album, because it's not really called that. Crushing production on this, although it's a little more sober and conservative than the production on Load and Reload, but I love the production. It's way better than the previous album, and Justice for All. I remember hearing the advanced single, Enter Sandman, and loving it and thinking, this is great. I love the direction this is going in. Turned out to be one of the best songs on the album, and a lot of the rest of it was kind of disappointing. So I've got it way down here to lowly 9. Holier Than Thou, I thought was pretty cool, up-tempo, cool AC/DC sort of thing. The fastest one on the whole album is left to the very end, The Struggle Within, but it's not even thrash. Love the drumming on it, though. Lars's drumming style is really evolving, and he's really getting into that thing of playing simply, but accenting in weird places, and he does that a lot on this album. Through the Never, I like a lot as well. Can't Stand Nothing Else Matters, or any of the mellow stuff on here. The Unforgiven, and just too much of the sloggy, doomy, stodgy. I feel the same complaints I have with Load and Reload are all over this album as well. I don't like this album very much more than Load or Reload. I think they're all kind of about the same. These three, they are of a set way more than just the story we know about Load and Reload sort of thing. So yeah, not a big fan of that. Number 8, I'm going with Volume 8, Anthrax. Kind of cool, calling it Volume 8. It's a clear reference to Volume 4. Um, and I love the production on here. Paul Crook and the band, July 21st, 98, sold terribly, 77,000 copies. Apparently, we've got Pantera guesting on a track here. But yeah, I find it very creative and interesting. They're trying to find new things. I mean, I remember at the time, it just blinding us to the whole album was that country song, right? It's like all we could think about. You know, you walked away and thought 50% of the album was country. You know, there might be a theme there. Have we done a show like that where one song? I know we've discussed it from time to time where one song just takes over your mind space about an album. That's all you can sort of think about, right?
There's a
But
lot of those. There's a lot of
yeah,
those.
yeah, it might be kind of cool if we haven't done it already. But I really like Big Fat on here and Toast to the Extras. I really like Catharsis. Um, and I just think they're finding really cool, interesting things to do with heavy metal. They are sincerely trying to break out. I mean, you can again give it a little bit of that Diablos in Musica idea where they are trying to be current. Um, so there is a little bit of that complaint, but yeah, there's Cup of Joe on here, 46 seconds of Stormtroopers of Death music kind of thing. It's quite funny. You got some slow doomy stuff, but yeah, Harm's Way, acoustic guitar, mid paced, great heavy chorus in it as well. Grunginess is one thing that these guys I think address a little bit, right? They seem to be one of the bands. Let's see, so Slayer doesn't go there. Megadeth doesn't go there. We think I would say you know, Black Album and all that is influenced a little bit by grunge, but I think Anthrax might be of the four the most influenced by grunge, but I think they do it in a really healthy, creative way. They're picking the best ideas from grunge. Uh, so that's that. Let's see, was that three? Repeat. Hang on, we get Metallica. Anyways, I'm up to yeah, I did eight. So I've got.
Yeah,
Do I
that
do
should have
one
been
more?
your 10-9-8, right? Yeah. Okay.
Am I done?
All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna go Diabolus in Musica by Slayer next at number 10.
Okay.
I don't think it's a terrible album. Bitter Peace is a ripper of an opener. I think any Slayer album would love to have a song like that opening it up. Really good. Death's Head is great. Although I guess you can kind of call that new metal-y in spots, but it's a fun song. Perversions of Pain is really good. I like In the Name of God. Some of the rest of the album sees them kind of straying a little bit too far from the path. Uh, I also think that myself, as a Slayer fan, by this time, I had pretty much lost interest in the band. But it's kind of interesting to go back and revisit some of these albums that I hadn't listened to in a long, long time. And I give them credit for trying to do some new stuff. Not all of it works, but at least they kind of stayed relevant for the most part. So not a bad album. Number 9, I'm going to go with Cryptic Writing from Megadeth. Last album with Nick Menza. Yeah, I mean, I still think Dan Huff was a strange choice as producer, but you know, whatever, it is what it is. This has been basically more of like a straightforward hard rock album. I think there are some, they don't sound anything like it, but I think where Megadeth was here is kind of like where Metallica was with the load period. They just wanted to try some new stuff. Yeah, not all of it works. Trust is a really good song. Really good. Cool riff on Mastermind. That's another good one. Disintegrators. That's like full on thrash. I think the one thing about this album that saves it for me from being much, much lower is like at least a couple of tracks. They still try to recapture the Megadeth we know and love. Sin is nice and heavy. She-Wolf is another really tight thrasher. Not a terrible album, but you know, the problem is you got half of it's kind of mellow and a little boring. Boring Megadeth is not a good thing in my book. So that's my number 9. And number 8, I'm going to go with Persistence of Time. Yeah, pretty cool song, pretty cool album. Um, you know, this is right before John joined, so it's like the band in transition. I think Time and Blood are two really good openers on here. I always thought the cover of Got the Time is kind of fun, right? I think they do it well. But production's okay on here. Discharge is good. I like Gridlock. I think Belly of the Beast is pretty good as well. I don't think this kind of competes with some of the best of the Anthrax in the 80s, but as a, you know, early 90s album, it's not terrible. It's okay, pretty good. So that's my number 10, 9, and 8.
Okay. Number 7 for me is Euthanasia, Megadeth. There's a framed up in a with a pass and an ad there from Burn Magazine, probably. There's the picture of them from that famous photo shoot where they're playing air guitar on the CD. That cover. So I don't think there's any rust in peace in Countdown to Extinction, but I think there's quite a bit of Countdown to Extinction in Euthanasia. I think this is a clear follow up. I really like the production. The production is less steely and scientific. It's a little warmer, but it's kind of cool. I still quite like the production. I love Reckoning Day, the first track. It reminds me of Savage for some reason from the new wave British heavy metal. A lot of things on here remind me of Except Balls to the Wall, Elysian Fields, A Tout Le Monde. And I thought I Knew It All reminds me of Black Album. And so does Black Curtain. So I think you do get a little bit of the effect of the enormous success of the Black Album here on this record. So it's groovy, it's sparse. I think it's the perfect balance, pretty much, of this new songwriting version of the band. It's kind of interesting that out of all four of these, Megadeth kind of picks a spot that none of the other guys do, right? Like I say, they stay away from grunge, they stay away from new metal, but their sort of idea is we're going to try write perfect accessible songs, right, and stay in the metal range, right? And the other guys are not about that. But I thought that's pretty cool about this album. I think it's the perfect balance of that moving into cryptic writings and risk. My number 6, I'm going with Stomp 442. We got a couple copies of that one here. And again, yeah, the Storm Thorgerson, just like kind of the Audio Slave and Pink Floyd of this sort of 90s period. But again, very creative. Didn't sell at all. October 21st, 95. Didn't certify. Big drop from ostensibly, says Wiki. The predecessor got to just over 500,000 at 511K. This is more like 115K. Butcher Brothers production. I think the production's good on it. But yeah, love random acts of senseless violence. Again, really clanging and creative, kind of interesting new way of doing metal. Fueled is very punky and funny. So they kind of go in that direction a little bit, where, maybe a little bit of Slayer, but they're going to their their East Coast New York hardcore roots. And I think that's the thing, to reiterate again. I know I said this in the 80s show, but there's just something that I feel is more artistically valid or mature or grown up or adult about East Coast thrash and hardcore versus West Coast thrash and hardcore. Yeah, king size, mid pace, punky. This is The Devil Lives in California. That sort of thing. I love John Bush's vocals and writing and everything. I think he's great in this band, even though we are talking about East Coast, West Coast there a little bit, but in his own Tribal Doomy, American Pompeii is you could really hear that Anthrax chemistry. I think this band just moves forward as one really cool machine, and I think they're all kind of on the same page, even with John Bush. And then at the end, you get one of those grungy Jar of Flies little acoustic thing, even with the bongos, right? The whole Planet Caravan thing going on there. And then at number 5, I've got Countdown to Extinction. This one here, which I love to death, played this like crazy when it came out. This is the first. Well, okay, so we know Slayer doesn't try to go accessible at all. Anthrax really doesn't either. They just kind of go creative and do different things. We know Metallica tries. But I think Megadeth does the best job of it. And things like Skin of My Teeth is just so irresistibly cool metal. I love that they're not particularly a thrash band on this album. The production by Max Norman is really, really clean and pristine. They're almost like the Steely Dan of thrash at this point. Symphony of Destruction is just like the most gorgeously written, catchiest, coolest song. All those things you love about those Pantera hits are in this song, kind of thing. And the whole rest of it's super strong as well. I really like High Speed Dirt late in the track sequence. I really like Ashes in Your Mouth, kind of the most AC/DC-ish one. It's got this kind of beat slowdown thing and a drop beat thing. This is the classic lineup. Nick Menza, Marty Friedman, Dave Jr., Ellefson, and Mustaine. I think I think just throughout this whole album, you feel a confidence in what they're doing. You like what they're doing. It's exciting and new and different from Rust in Peace, and just solid all the way through. Double platinum, which is great for them as well. So that is my apparently 7, 6, and 5. There you go.
All right, my number 7 is the Black Album, self-titled Metallica. I mean, I loved it when it came out, and I've had a hard time listening to it in years since, but it is still really, it sold gazillion copies for a reason, right? I still think Enter, even though I don't really never need to hear it again, I still think Enter Sandman is a terrific, terrific song. Sad but True as well. Holier Than Thou is great. I like you. I don't like the ballads at all. Wherever I May Roam is a fun song. I really dig that a lot. Of Wolf and Man is good. But yeah, it's just The Struggle Within is pretty cranking. But it's I don't know. It's a band in transition, obviously, and the transition worked for them, but it doesn't 100% work for me anymore. But what's good on here is still really good. That's my number 7. My number 6 is Slayer Divine Intervention, which for me, the last like 100% enjoyable Slayer album, start to finish, I think. This one, I mean, Killing Fields is terrific. Sex, Murder, Art, excellent. You get the doomy title track. Serenity and Murder is just absolutely frantic Slayer. To me, what I really like about this album, it sounds like the merging of South of Heaven and Seasons in the Abyss all in one album. It's like they kind of like took what they were doing on both of those albums, put it all in this one, and then going forward, they started changing even more. So really good album. Cool cover on it too. I don't have a hard copy of it, but yeah. And my number 6 is Euthanasia by Megadeth. Yeah, I mean, they're just writing great songs, whether you call it thrash or just metal or groove metal, whatever the hell you want to call it, progressive metal. I think they're writing great songs here. I love the production of this album. This is the classic lineup. I mean, Train of Consequences, yeah, ditch the harmonica, but I think it's a fun, fun song. Addicted to Chaos of Tu Lamont is really good. Elysian Fields, title track. Black Curtains, it's just got this vibe about it, and the songs are memorable. The guitar playing is sensational. And I think that I agree with you. I think out of all these bands, these guys really figured out a way to kind of be a little bit more accessible, but still retain everything we loved about the band from the prior decade. I mean, I think Metallica obviously figured out how to become accessible, but they kind of pissed a lot of people off because they weren't sounding like they used to. I think Megadeth still sounded like Megadeth, but they did it in a more commercial way, and I think it really, really worked. So yeah, that's my number 7, 6, and 5.
Okay, all right. My number 4 is Seasons in the Abyss, Slayer. I'm really surprised how high I've got some Slayer albums on here, because I know I was kind of rating them low in the 80s one, but I've always considered this one and South of Heaven of a set. And I just love the way there's a fair bit of slowing down on here, or lapsing into halftime as well. But it opens with a typical fast one, War Ensemble, 31 million plays on Spotify. This is a pretty popular album. One thing I notice is I'm not as crazy when I did comparisons. I'm not as crazy about the production on this as I am on the one after it or the one before it, which I find kind of weird. I find it a little bit loose, but you've got some good typical fast Slayer on here, like Born of Fire. The title track is almost like it's almost like them trying to do Rain and Blood again. Come up with this epic thing with a fair bit of parts. We've got Dead Skin Mask was a big one on here, double bass, mid pace. So yeah, this is the kind of Slayer that it almost sounds like a cross to me between Rain and Blood and South of Heaven. So it's like they're going back a little bit to what they did before. So it's a good mix, but it's not a particularly creative or moving forward, or even, dare I say, mature sort of album. I should have held this up before. Apologies. But number 3, Divine Intervention. This was my favorite part of this entire exercise, realizing how much I love this album. This is such a cool album. Toby Wright producing, carnal guitar sound on here. Paul Bostaff. I find him to be crazy ambitious on here. He's almost like Dave Lombardo on steroids, or a slightly less wacky version of Charlie Benanti. He does an amazing job on here. Plays so fast and does some really interesting Charlie-like creative things on it. I think he's the secret weapon. 4 years wait. It's very ambitious. I love Killing Fields, which is proggy. Again, big drum showpiece. I think it's a masterpiece of a song. And Sex Murder Art. Mind Control is typical fast Slayer on here, but SS3 proggy, cool opening halftime thing going on again there. Again, I think the great thing about this is it actually might be the best produced Slayer album. I think the production's really good, and it's uncompromising, super heavy. No, we're not moving into any trying new metal things or anything. And the other thing is, I remember around this time, even with the magazine, Slayer were very proud of the fact that this is 1994. They're very proud of the fact that out of all the bands, they're the ones sticking with the old thrash style the most. So this is really pure Slayer. Now moving on to this is the sorry, drop that. This is the the die cut thing that it came in.
Oh yeah, yep.
So I managed to not wreck that. Next I've got at number 2 out of all 16, I've got Anthrax, Sound of White Noise. We were totally into, I got 2 copies of it there. We were totally into this album when it came out. Obviously the big story at the time was John Bush taking over. May 25th, 93, it goes gold. But I find the songs on here, you've got 11 songs. Dave Jordan is producing. It's a very thick, coagulated, not particularly trebly high end on it, but just a lot of booming bass and low mids on it. I think on this one, this is the band that reacts the most to grunge, but again, in a good way. I think the album cover is absolutely terrible, as is the title. And it kind of has a grunge feel to it. And I think that back cover is total indie rock grunge sort of look. Right. And with the flashy, goofy song titles as well. A lot of one-word stuff like Burst and Invisible and Only. I mean, a song called Only is just such a grunge title, right? It's just kind of ridiculous. But I think this is a cool combination of there's no old Anthrax in this sound at all, but it's a combination of creative grunge and almost like meat and potatoes, good old American heavy metal kind of thing on this record. But it is very creative. I just love what they do with it. I think it was a cool direction. And my number 1 out of all of these is Rust in Peace, Megadeth. Again, I think at this point, it's interesting. I did a History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff episode. I even put it in the title, but I felt like for a 6-month period, Megadeth was a cooler band than Metallica and possibly even more successful than Metallica. So at this point, with Justice, and we haven't had the Black Album yet, and we know that Countdown comes after the Black Album. So for a weird time there. So in 88, you've got people kind of complaining about Metallica and this weirdly produced, way too proggy, way too long songs, double album on vinyl. And Megadeth is just merrily humming along, having these gold and platinum albums that are pretty accessible that people like. And then they come out with this masterpiece, kind of right in between, Metallica's massive raise in fortunes. And this thing is just, it's one of the coolest sounding albums in terms of production. Mike Klink, of all people, because it doesn't sound like Guns N' Roses. Mike Klink and Dave Mustaine, and mixed by Max Norman. That's an important part of this as well. So it's got this seething, bubbly, trebly, distorted sort of feel on the guitars. Everything sounds like it's melting together. It's we talked about the summer before. This is the big Phoenix album, right? This feels like a hot Phoenix album, and and the back cover looks very, heated up and hot, and everything about this is just really electrocuted sounding. I think Holy Wars, the punishment due, is a masterpiece. My favorite song has always been the Hangar 18. To me, that's a harbinger, whatever it's called, of what we're getting, what we're going to get on Countdown. But the whole rest of it is really cool too. Lucretia, Tornado of Souls, Accessible, Chugging, I guess, Chugging, that's a little bit moving forward as well. And then Rust in Peace, Polaris again. Weirdly that they do this here, but great proggy ending to it. Such a symphony of destruction at the end of this album with the way they close that song, by switching gears. I think it's just an absolute masterpiece. 9 songs, which is great. And you just feel so much confidence in the band at this point. You feel like everybody in the band is kind of a genius of thrash at this, right? It's just this machine that's working together so well, and all 4 guys. And yeah, I think, like I say, I think for a brief minute there, Megadeth was a better band than Metallica. And it was happening just right around here. But then, of course, Metallica came along and said, "Hold my beer," right?
That's right.
Absolutely. So
they certainly did. They certainly did.
Yeah. There you go. Number 1.
All right. My number 4 is Sounds of White Noise. That here's the conundrum for me.
Glad you got one of these so high. That's wicked.
But that's what always like stupefied me, because it's like I love this album so much, yet I find the ones that came after just very disappointing for me. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. This is kind of a grungy album. More importantly, it's a very old school US metal sounding record. And I have to think that maybe John Bush coming into the band, they kind of wanted him to kind of fit in really easily, because I get a little Armored Saint on this album, and not just from the vocal perspective. I think some of the songs have that beefiness of Armored Saint, but I just think this is filled with great songs. I mean, Potter's Field is terrific. Room for One More is a total killer of the song. I could listen to that over and over and over again. Invisible, I mean, Burst, This Is Not an Exit, terrific. I like the production of the album. Only is a really good song as well. Yeah, terrible choice of a title. Yeah, it looks like a shit album. I mean, it totally does. I remember when this came out, I was kind of like, but I was like, but it's got John Bush. It's got to be good. And it really, really is. So yeah, that's my number 4. Excellent. I was just listening to this. I've listened to it a lot over the last couple of weeks. Actually, really, really good album. And John sounds amazing on it. I think very highly of him, and I think he's just roaring on it big time. Yeah. Really, really good stuff. Number 3, I'm going to go with Seasons in the Abyss. Yeah, this is kind of like Rain and Blood meets South of Heaven for sure. And maybe it's not really doing much of anything different, but I, at the time, loved it. I like the fact, because I remember going back in time. To me, I always thought South of Heaven at the time was a little disappointing because it was so much slower than the raging intensity of Rain and Blood. Now I really enjoy that aspect of it. And I think this is kind of like a blending of the two. And at the time, I was like, oh, we're getting back to what Slayer is all about, which I think is really cool. But yeah, War Ensemble is so good. Spirit of Black, Dead Skin Mask is terrific. Skeleton Society. I mean, just top to bottom, it's a really, really strong album. And I love the title track to close out the album. I think it's really, really cool. So yeah, and that classic cover, right? So that's my number 3. My number 2, I'm going to go with Countdown to Extinction. Again, kind of like Euthanasia, just filled with great, memorable songs. The playing is top notch. Always love the cover and everything like that. But man, Skin of My Teeth is so good. Symphony of Destruction just crushes. I love Architecture of a Dream, of Aggression. Foreclosure of a Dream is so good and so memorable. Sweating Bullets is kind of silly but fun. I mean, the title track is great. Psychotron is killer. Ashes in Your Mouth. I mean, there's really not a bad song on it. This is just Megadeth playing kind of thrashy metal, but more importantly, just memorable song after memorable song after memorable song, loaded with riffs and guitar solos. Really, really great. And my number 1, like you, is this. Could it be the greatest thrash album ever produced? Possibly. But it's proggy as hell. I mean, this is like a guitar lover's dream, this album. So good. Not a weak moment on it. You hit the nail on the head. 9 songs, not a wasted moment. It comes in, kicks your ass, and gets out of Dodge real quick. There's not a wasted breath here at all. The band obviously peaking, and I think when you listen to all the 3 albums that came before it, this just seems like that like that major step into the big leagues for them.
Wow.
It takes all that was so great about, or all the great parts of the first three, and kicks it up a notch. And I think Marty Friedman was the right guy to come into this band to help make that happen. I mean, Holy War is the punishment due. I mean, Lucretia, Tornado of Souls is just kick ass. Not a bad song on here. It doesn't make sense to go through the track listing again. And the cover is amazing. So, and it's really, really wonderfully produced too. So yeah, there you have it.
Yeah, very cool. That was a fun exercise, and a few surprises and a few reacquaintances with these records. And like I say, generally speaking, I'd say Megadeth stayed in about the same place for me because I always had a high regard for those albums. But both Slayer and Anthrax went even higher for me, and then Metallica in the '90s went down for, well, it confirmed that why I was not listening to those records at all. So.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting if we do decide to do the 2000s for all of them at some point. So then it even gets more the whole story gets even more bizarre, right? Because then you got, Metallica going away for a while, then trying to get back to their roots. You've got Anthrax reuniting with Joey. You've got Slayer doing these kind of weird, kind of really extreme albums for the time, and then you got Megadeth, roaring back once again. So yeah, that's story for another day, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, Martin, what's going on over with the podcast and the Contrarians and books and things like that?
Well, let's see. So the podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The last one was I listened to every single Black Sabbath intro and grouped them and noticed certain themes with them. And then the next one I'm going to do, I already made my notes, so I got to do it, is, and it's funny, you and I, we never did a show like this. We did one similar, but I'm literally going to just go through that debate of what is the greatest band of all time? Not my favorite, staying away from that, but just what is the greatest band of all time and what are the reasons? Because I went on this, I went on a great sort of Queen debate with Cody Brockway, and he entitled it, "Is Queen the greatest band of all time?" It's like, we didn't even really talk about that very much in it, but I posted that on my Facebook, and of course, more than half the people probably didn't even go listen to it, but they saw that title and they just kept answering, right? Yes, no, like just with no explanation, right? And then oddly, Forbes came out with a list recently. I got to go find that and compare, but they talked about what is the greatest band of all time. So I'm gonna do that. And then books wise, either today or tomorrow, I get Queen Live ! Which is just like those visual biographies I've been doing, but with more of an emphasis on Queen. The reason I'm stumbling over my words a little bit today, I found, is that because this was a big test. I have been doing a lot of talking, but I had a tooth extracted in a weird place, second from last at the top, and I find like it surprises me every once in a while, and I either slur something or lisp or just stumble over a word kind of thing. So yeah, I got to get used to it because I don't get it replaced for 6 months.
Oh yeah, your mouth's got to get used to the fact that there's something missing.
There's a little bone graft there and stuff. Yeah, $3,000, and it's going to be a $7,000 round trip with no insurance by the time we're done. So great for one tooth, right? And there's a lot of teeth in your mouth, right? So I hope they don't all cost me $7,000 a pop as we move along. But anyway, so at Contrarians, we did our album cover show. Yeah, so I got the Queen book coming. Still got the Led Zeppelin visual biography. The Van Halen at 50 still doing well. Done a lot of interviews for that, with more to come. And yeah, that's kind of what's going on.
Cool. Well, let's see, what do we got going on here? Ken Golden will be coming in a couple hours for Professor's Picks. That's coming up. We've also got UK Connection happening on tomorrow, where we will be revisiting what we picked as our favorite albums, our top 10 albums of 2011. We're kind of going to look back on that year in music and what we chose as the best albums of the year, and we're going to see if we agree with what we picked out all those years ago. It's got 13 years ago. It's crazy. And then Sunday, Grant Arthur will be back, and we'll be ranking the albums of Tommy Shaw, his solo albums, the Shaw Blade albums, and the Damn Yankees albums. So they'll all be together, and we're going to rank those. So it's Tommy Shaw Day on Sunday. And that's what's happening. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together. all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please hit the like button before you leave. We'll see you next week here at the Funhouse alongside Martin Popoff. I'm Pete Pardo. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. See you later on. Take care. Bye-bye.